September 9, 1943. What does it feel like to crawl through blood-soaked sand in total darkness? Hearing men scream for their mothers while knowing the next shell might erase your name from history forever? That is the question that hangs over Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of mainland Italy, and the forgotten story of the combat medics who landed with the first assault waves at Salerno. Men trained not to kill but forced to run straight into hell with nothing but a red cross on their helmet and a bag of morphine, bandages and raw courage. As dawn broke over the Tyrrhenian Sea and German artillery opened up the beaches with terrifying precision, turning the shoreline into a living nightmare where landing craft exploded before ramps could drop and bodies floated in the surf beside shattered equipment. And among that chaos, the medics moved, unarmed, exposed, and fully visible, sprinting across open sand while machine gun bullets snapped inches from their heads, dropping to their knees beside the wounded, sometimes realizing too late that the man they were trying to save had already bled out. His eyes open and fixed on the sky, and yet they stayed, because retreat was not an option and fear had to be swallowed whole. Operation Avalanche was meant to be a bold strike to knock Italy out of the war, but intelligence failures and underestimating German resistance turned it into one of the most brutal beach assaults of World War II. And by the afternoon of the first day, German panzer divisions counterattacked with savage force, pushing Allied troops back toward the sea, creating moments where commanders seriously considered evacuation. And in those hours, medics found themselves trapped between advancing tanks and collapsing defensive lines, dragging wounded men into shell craters already filled with rainwater and blood, using their own bodies as shields as shrapnel tore through the air. One medic later recalled performing emergency amputations with shaking hands while artillery thundered so close the ground jumped beneath him. Another described the horror of a field hospital being overrun by German infantry at night, the screams of patients mixing with gunfire and the smell of burning canvas, forcing medics to choose who could be carried and who would be left behind, choices that haunted them for the rest of their lives. The war at Salerno was intimate and terrifying, not distant or heroic in the movie sense, but close enough to smell fear, close enough to hear bones snap, close enough to see faces blown apart by mortar rounds, and still the medics kept moving. Crawling through vineyards turned into killing zones, wading through flooded fields under moonlight, while flares lit the sky like ghostly suns, sometimes stepping on bodies they could not see until it was too late. And yet there were moments of raw heroism that defied belief, like medics who ran into active minefields to pull out wounded infantry, or those who worked for 72 hours without sleep, hands permanently stained red, refusing evacuation even after being wounded themselves, because too many others needed them. The German counterattack on September 13th reached terrifying intensity, with tanks breaking through Allied lines and artillery pounding the beaches non-stop, creating scenes so chaotic that medics treated American, British, and even wounded German soldiers side by side, ignoring uniforms and focusing only on survival, while naval gunfire roared overhead in a desperate attempt to stop the enemy advance. And during those hours, some medics found themselves isolated behind enemy lines, hiding in farmhouses or olive groves with wounded men, listening to German boots crunch past in the dark, knowing that discovery would mean execution, and still whispering words of comfort to dying soldiers whose names they would never forget. These were not officially classified missions and paperwork, but in reality they were assignments so dangerous that few talked about them after the war. Because how do you explain the sound a human body makes when hit by artillery? Or the way fear tastes when you are kneeling in the open with no weapon while bullets tear through the air around you? Or the moment you realize the man you just saved will die anyway before sunrise? By the time Operation Avalanche secured a fragile foothold and the Germans began their withdrawal, thousands were dead or wounded, and the beaches of Salerno were layered with wreckage. Broken landing craft, burned vehicles, and shallow graves. But the medics walked away, carrying invisible scars far heavier than their medical packs. Having witnessed humanity at its absolute worst and its absolute best in the same muddy fields. And their courage pushed the boundaries of human endurance in ways history rarely pauses to honor. If this story of sacrifice, terror, and unarmed heroism moved you, if you can imagine standing there on that beach in 1943 and still choosing to run toward the wounded instead of away from the fire, then comment below with your thoughts on Operation Avalanche and the men who served as medics under fire. And ask yourself one final question before you leave. How many acts of silent bravery are still buried in the shadows of war, waiting for someone brave enough to remember them?